When the first body was discovered in a clawfoot tub, eyes wide open, skin pale as porcelain, and the water turned solid ice in the middle of summer, authorities thought it was a freak accident. But then came the second, and the third, each one colder than the last, and all in different cities. The killer didn't leave fingerprints, only frozen silence. It began on a blistering July morning in Bakersfield, California. A neighbor, concerned about the newspapers piling up on the front porch of 63-year-old Marcia Allen's home, called the police for a welfare check. When officers arrived and stepped inside, they expected the usual signs of an unattended death, perhaps a stroke, maybe a heart attack. But what they found instead would change the course of 6 investigations to come. Marcia was found seated in her clawfoot bathtub, eyes wide open, lips parted as if frozen mid-scream. Her body was submerged in crystal-clear ice, not cold water. The entire tub had frozen solid, yet there was no frost on the bathroom mirrors, no chill in the air, and no malfunctioning HVAC system. It was 96 degrees outside, and the thermostat inside read 73. There was no sign of forced entry, no broken windows, no bruises or injuries. Just a woman suspended in time, encased in a tomb of ice. The coroner was baffled. The medical report could not list an official cause of death. Her vitals were normal before death. There was no trauma, no drugs, no evidence of drowning. The official label? Unexplained. The police chalked it up to a possible freak malfunction of water pipes or strange electrical interference. The case didn't make it past the local news. Until it happened again. 2 weeks later and 400 miles away, a young accountant named Darnell Weaver was discovered in an almost identical state. A coworker reported him missing when he failed to show up to a client meeting. When authorities entered his apartment in suburban Phoenix, they found the bathroom locked from the inside. They had to break the door down. The water inside the tub had frozen again, despite 100-degree desert heat outside and no refrigeration equipment of any kind inside the apartment. Darnell's body was pale, rigid, and undisturbed, just like Marcia's. No injuries, no drugs, no sign of violence. This time, a local journalist connected the dots between the two incidents. The story gained minor national attention, but most dismissed it as a coincidence. Theories began to circulate: alien abduction, government experiments, cursed water pipes. The more people speculated, the less seriously the authorities seemed to take it. But then a third body was discovered, and the media couldn't ignore it anymore. The third victim, a schoolteacher named Rachel King, was found in Oregon, once again in a bathtub filled with completely frozen water. Again, no signs of foul play. No indication of how the water had been flash frozen in a non-refrigerated room. Her cell phone was placed neatly on the sink. The doors were locked from the inside. And the water was so perfectly frozen that her hair floated in suspended animation. By this point, investigators from the 3 separate cases were forced to compare notes. The victims had no known connections to each other. Different professions, different races, different socioeconomic backgrounds. No overlapping acquaintances. They had not traveled to the same locations. They didn't know each other on social media. They had nothing in common, except the way they died. A task force was quickly assembled. But they had no leads. There were no fingerprints at any of the scenes. No traceable DNA. No signs of entry or exit. Security cameras in nearby homes showed nothing unusual, no one entering or leaving around the time of death. It was as if the killer had simply appeared out of thin air and vanished again. The media latched onto the strangeness of it all. The ice bath killer, they called the mysterious figure behind the deaths. Cable shows and podcasts erupted with bizarre theories, cryogenic experiments, black market technology, even time travel. But for the families of the victims there was no mystery, only grief and fear. Someone was staging calculated murders and they were getting away with it. When the fourth body appeared in Denver, same pattern, same ice, the fear turned to panic. A map of the locations showed something no one wanted to see. The killer was moving in a slow, deliberate arc across the country. A chilling path that suggested planning, purpose, and worst of all, an endpoint. Detectives tried to isolate possible correlations. The victims all lived alone. They were found on weekends. Their bathrooms were always meticulously clean. That detail stuck out, almost like a ritual. But why the ice? Why freeze them? Was it a signature? A statement? Law enforcement agencies started working overtime, checking travel logs, studying water samples, running door-to-door interviews. But nothing ever pointed to a suspect. Each scene was silent, clinical, emotionless, like it had been orchestrated by a machine. But deep down, investigators knew this wasn't automation. This was obsession. One profiler suggested that the killer was obsessed with stillness. That the ice symbolized control, the ultimate preservation of life at the moment of death. Another theory proposed that the killer viewed water as a metaphor, submersion as rebirth, frozen death as purification. But these were only theories. The reality was simpler and more terrifying. Someone had figured out how to kill without leaving a trace. As the fifth weekend approached, law enforcement scrambled to predict where the killer might strike next. But the public was already in fear. People stopped using their bathtubs. Some poured boiling water down their drains. Others slept with knives beside their beds, convinced the killer could walk through walls. But the next victim would prove the killer wasn't finished evolving. Because this time, the body wasn't just found frozen. It was arranged. And it sent a message no one was ready to read. The investigation had gone cold, ironically fitting considering the circumstances. Dozens of officers, analysts, and specialists had combed through every detail of the frozen bathtub murders. Each scene was pristine, absent of struggle, blood, or any tangible evidence. But it was Dana Rowe, a forensic analyst with a stubborn instinct and a record for spotting microscopic details, who noticed something strange in the crime scene reports, something no one else had seen or bothered to question. At first, it was a footnote, a small mention of a clear, crystalline residue found around the drain in the second victim's bathtub. It had been dismissed as leftover cleaning solution or mineral buildup. But Dana had a habit of questioning what others ignored. She tracked down residue reports from all 5 crime scenes. And to her surprise, each mentioned a similar compound, something slick, odorless, and not naturally occurring in household water. She requested physical samples from evidence storage. The compound didn't match anything in domestic cleaning products or typical water contaminants. It wasn't bleach. It wasn't soap scum. It was something synthetic. Dana reached out to an old chemistry professor for help. The moment he saw the molecular breakdown, his face changed. He leaned back, silent, before speaking one sentence that made Dana's pulse spike. This isn't meant for civilian use. This is a cryogenic agent. The chemical in question was a prototype compound designed to flash freeze small amounts of liquid without lowering the ambient room temperature. Originally developed for deep space research and experimental surgeries, it required specialized handling and storage in secure, regulated environments. It wasn't something you could just buy online or cook up in a garage. Dana dug deeper. The manufacturer was a biotech lab in Colorado specializing in medical cooling systems. She discovered that 3 months before the first murder, a small shipment of the cryogenic agent had gone missing from their records. The company had dismissed it as a clerical error, but Dana wasn't convinced. She requested internal personnel files and security logs and found what she needed, an anomaly. One lab technician, a man named Elias Mercer, had been terminated quietly 2 weeks after the missing shipment. The reason listed? Breach of lab protocol and psychological instability. No charges were filed. No further investigation was launched. Dana tried to contact Elias but got no response. His phone was disconnected. His address led to a boarded-up house on the outskirts of Boulder, long since abandoned. The man had vanished. While most of the task force continued chasing dead ends, Dana kept building a profile. She began reconstructing Mercer's employment history, his personal habits, and the timeline of his termination. The more she learned, the more alarmed she became. Mercer had published obscure research papers in fringe journals, papers that proposed freezing as a form of psychological preservation, arguing that emotions could be suspended in time, like frozen water molecules. He wasn't just interested in cryogenics. He was obsessed. Dana knew the others wouldn't take her seriously without proof. She needed something undeniable. So she traced delivery records from the missing chemical batch and found something chilling. Several containers of industrial-grade refrigerant had been delivered under a false business name to 5 different storage units across 3 states. All the units were rented under different aliases, but one common thread connected them. Surveillance footage from each showed the same man. Average height, shaved head, always wearing gloves, never facing the camera directly. In every clip he moved like a ghost. She presented her findings to the task force, but not everyone was convinced. They dismissed Mercer's psychological writings as fringe science, and labeled her theory speculative. Dana was furious. People were dying and the killer was escalating. The most recent victim wasn't just frozen. She had been posed, arms folded over her chest, like a sleeping figure in a tomb. A white lily had been placed on the windowsill. It was theatrical. A message. Dana understood something vital at that moment. The killer wasn't just experimenting. He was performing. She started receiving anonymous emails 2 days later. No sender. No traceable IP. The subject line on each was the same: "You're getting warmer." The first email had no body text. The second had a blurry image, an old family photo that included Dana as a child. Her blood ran cold. The third email contained a chilling sentence: "Water stills the soul. Ice makes it eternal." Panic took over, but Dana knew fear couldn't stop her. It was clear now: Mercer, if he was indeed the killer, was watching her. Maybe even reading her reports. Her obsession with the case had drawn him in. That meant she was on the right path. But it also meant she was running out of time. She installed security systems in her apartment, stopped drinking from her tap, and began checking her thermostat every hour. At night, she could hear water dripping, though she couldn't find the source. Once, she came home to find her bathtub filled, though she never remembered turning on the faucet. Another night, she woke up in a cold sweat, convinced someone had been standing at the foot of her bed, watching her. Dana knew she couldn't walk away now. This killer was methodical, calculating, and terrifyingly intelligent. He didn't make mistakes until now. Watching her was a mistake. Threatening her was a mistake. Because Dana had something the others didn't. Motive? She didn't just want justice. She wanted to stop him before he disappeared again, before another bathtub turned to ice. Dana stood at her window and watched the street below. She hadn't left her apartment in days. Every sound outside made her heart beat faster. Every faucet, every drop of water felt like a threat. The anonymous emails had stopped, but that only made her more anxious. The silence was never good. Mercer was too calculated to act out of emotion. He was watching, waiting, planning. She knew what she had to do. The decision wasn't easy. The task force wouldn't authorize a trap, and surveillance resources were stretched thin. So Dana designed her own plan, relying on herself as bait. She deliberately leaked a false internal memo online, suggesting a breakthrough in the case, that investigators had matched Mercer's DNA to a recent crime scene. The leak would be obvious to someone like him. He would know the DNA angle was a lie. But that was the point. It was an invitation. An intellectual challenge. She left the rest of the bait in plain sight. A redacted lab report taped to her apartment window, and a brief interview with a journalist where she boldly stated, "If the killer is watching, he should know. We know who he is now." It was theatrical. Just like him. The waiting was unbearable. 2 nights passed. Then 3. On the 4th night something changed. It was subtle, a strange hum in the air conditioner, a soft vibration in the walls. Dana checked her thermostat. It read 74 degrees. Normal. But the air felt wrong. Heavier. She walked to the bathroom and stood outside the closed door. Her hand trembled slightly as she reached for the knob. She hadn't touched the bathroom in days, too afraid of what she might find. But now she had to know. Inside everything looked the same. No water in the tub. No signs of disturbance. But when she leaned closer to the faucet, she noticed a faint sheen on the metal, a greasy, almost glassy residue. She didn't need to test it. She recognized it from the reports. It was the compound. Mercer had been here. She stepped back into the hallway and picked up her phone, hands shaking, ready to call for backup. But before she could press the first number, the power cut out. The apartment went dark. Silence followed. Then the unmistakable sound of water, running. The sound wasn't coming from her bathroom. It was coming from the apartment above her. Dana sprinted upstairs, heart racing. She pounded on the door. No answer. The sound of water grew louder, steady, unnatural. She made the call then, breathless, adrenaline flooding her chest. Officers arrived minutes later and forced the door open. The apartment was empty. No furniture, no personal items. Just a bathroom. A single clawfoot tub filled with water, and at the bottom of it, a frozen mannequin dressed in Dana's clothes. It wasn't just a taunt. It was a message. She had been watched more closely than she'd imagined. Mercer had been inside her building. Maybe inside her apartment. The trap hadn't caught him. It had provoked him. He wasn't running anymore. He was circling. The next 24 hours were a blur. Police escorted Dana to a secure safe house. But she couldn't sleep. The sound of that running water played over and over in her head like a loop. The frozen mannequin haunted her. Mercer was escalating, not retreating. And now it was personal. But it also meant something else. He was getting sloppy. Dana reviewed footage from the apartment complex again, this time frame by frame, searching for anything that might have been missed. And there it was, barely visible. A figure on the fire escape moving just before the power outage. The face was obscured, but the posture was familiar. She enhanced the clip and noticed something new, a thermal signature around the jacket. The cryogenic compound wasn't stable. It left micro-residue that reflected under certain light frequencies. That was her break. She contacted a lab and had them build a scanner that could detect trace remnants of the compound on surfaces, objects, even clothing. It was untested, but it might work. She convinced the lead investigator to authorize a discreet sweep of recent crime scenes, abandoned warehouses, and biotech facilities connected to Mercer. It paid off. Inside a decommissioned testing facility outside Albuquerque, the scanner lit up. Behind a false wall, officers found a hidden room. Inside was Mercer's lab, a twisted shrine to freezing. The walls were lined with temperature gauges, diagrams, and photos of every victim. Dana's photo was pinned dead center, marked with the word ready. She wasn't the final target. She was the final act. That night, Mercer returned to his lair, and found it surrounded. He didn't fight. He didn't run. He simply stared at Dana, calm and quiet as they took him away. His only words were whispered as if to himself, "Stillness is purity." In the days that followed, investigators found dozens of additional names and planned murders. People chosen seemingly at random, all marked with dates. Mercer had mapped out a future of terror. Dana's actions stopped it all. But she never felt safe again. Even years later, every time she walked past a bathroom she checked the tub. Not for bodies. Not for Mercer. For eyes.